Dr. Amanda Foster floated in zero gravity inside the research station New Horizons, her eyes fixed on the holographic display that showed impossible readings. The numbers made no sense according to everything humanity knew about physics. Space itself was bending in ways that should not be possible. "Captain Peters," she called across the laboratory module. "You need to see this right now." Captain Roy Peters pushed himself off the wall and drifted over to Amanda's workstation. He was an old space hand who had seen many strange things during his years exploring the outer systems, but the look on Amanda's face told him this was different. The holographic display showed a three-dimensional map of local space extending out 50 light-years from Earth. Red dots marked the positions of human colonies and research stations. Blue dots showed the locations of alien worlds that humanity had detected but never contacted. But there was something else on the display now, something that had not been there yesterday. Between the stars in the empty void where nothing should exist, patches of absolute darkness were growing. They were not black holes. They were not nebulas or dust clouds. They were areas where light simply ceased to exist, as if space itself was being erased. "What am I looking at, Doc?" Captain Peters asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Amanda pulled up more data screens around them. Charts and graphs filled the air with numbers that climbed higher every hour. 3 days ago, our deep space sensors started picking up gravitational anomalies. At first, I thought it was equipment failure, but then the anomalies started spreading. She highlighted one of the dark patches on the display. This region used to contain a binary star system with 6 planets. The sensors say it's still there, but we can't see it anymore. The light from those stars just stops. It doesn't scatter or bend or fade. It simply ends. Captain Peters studied the display and felt a cold feeling grow in his stomach. The dark patches were not random. They formed a pattern spreading inward from the galactic rim toward the core worlds where most of the intelligent species lived. "How long do we have?" he asked. Amanda's fingers danced across her controls, running calculations based on the spread rate of the darkness. The answer appeared as a red countdown timer floating in the air between them. "If the expansion continues, at the current rate, the darkness will reach Earth in approximately 18 months. The captain activated the emergency communication system and sent a priority message to Earth Command. Within hours, every human colony and research station had received the same data. The response was immediate and desperate. President Helen Garcia stood in the Situation Room deep beneath the White House, surrounded by humanity's best military leaders and scientists. The same holographic display that Amanda Foster had shown Captain Peters now filled the center of the room, but with more detail and more red warning indicators. "Ladies and gentlemen," President Garcia said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. "Dr. Foster's data has been confirmed by 15 independent observation posts. We are looking at an extinction-level event that appears to be affecting the entire galaxy." General Carl Davis, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, pointed at the spreading darkness. "Madam President, we've tried to contact our monitoring stations in the affected areas. They don't respond. Long-range scans show no debris, no wreckage, nothing. It's like they never existed." The president turned to Dr. Linda Hayes, Earth's leading theoretical physicist. "Doctor, what are we dealing with here?" Dr. Hayes manipulated the display to show a cross-section view of one of the dark regions. "Based on our analysis, these areas exist in a state between dimensions. Normal matter and energy cannot interact with whatever is causing this effect. It's as if reality itself is being systematically deleted." Admiral Jake Morrison entered the room carrying a data pad filled with intercepted alien communications. His face was grim as he set the device on the conference table. "We've been monitoring alien broadcast frequencies," he reported. 3 hours ago, we started receiving distress signals from the same species that rejected our application to join their cooperative." He activated the data pad and alien voices filled the room, translated into English by humanity's best linguists. The voices were filled with panic and despair. "This is Zephyrian command to all vessels. The Devourers have returned. Repeat, the Devourers have returned. All ships retreat to the inner systems immediately." Another transmission followed. This one from the insect-like species that had mocked humanity's primitive technology. Krethak. Defense forces falling back to the home system. Our weapons have no effect. The ancient enemy comes again. More voices joined the chorus of fear. The elegant blue-skinned aliens who had dismissed humanity as warlike barbarians now begged for help from anyone who would listen. The stone creatures who had called humans children were screaming into space as their worlds went dark one by one. President Garcia listened to the alien voices with growing understanding. They know what this is. They've seen it before. Admiral? Morrison nodded. From what we can piece together from their broadcasts, this has happened before in galactic history. Every 50,000 years, entities they call devourers emerge from between dimensions and consume entire civilizations. The current galactic powers are apparently the survivors of the last such event. Dr. Hayes pulled up historical data on her workstation. That would explain why all the major alien civilizations are so old, and why they seem to have similar technology levels despite being different species. They're all survivors of previous devourer attacks. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. Humanity was facing an enemy that had destroyed countless civilizations across millions of years, an enemy that the most advanced species in the galaxy could not fight. Captain Susan Baker, the youngest ship commander in Earth's fleet, broke the silence. So what do we do about it? President Garcia looked around the room at the assembled leaders of humanity. We do what humans do best. We find a way to fight back. Over the following weeks, more alien distress signals reached Earth. Entire star systems went dark as the Devourers advanced toward the galactic core. The crystal towers of Vextar Prime, where humanity had been rejected just months earlier, flickered and then vanished into absolute darkness. The galactic cooperative that had dismissed humanity as too primitive to join was collapsing as its member worlds fell one by one to an enemy they could not understand or fight. Their advanced technology, perfected over millions of years, was useless against beings that existed beyond the normal rules of physics. But on a small blue planet in an unremarkable star system, a young species that had been laughed at for their crude weapons and primitive ships began preparing for war. They did not have energy beings or crystalline technology or the ancient wisdom of species that had existed since before Earth's sun was born. What they had was something the galaxy had forgotten in its millions of years of peace and prosperity. They had the knowledge of how to fight when fighting seemed impossible. They had the willingness to try solutions that more advanced minds would dismiss as hopeless. As the darkness crept closer to the inner systems and the last alien worlds sent out their final desperate broadcasts, humanity prepared to do something that no other species had attempted in 50,000 years. They prepared to meet the Devourers head-on and make them bleed. The great crystal towers of Vextar Prime reached into the purple sky like frozen lightning. Admiral Jake Morrison stood at the wide window of his transport ship and watched the alien world grow larger as they approached. He had never seen anything like it before. The entire planet seemed to be made of living glass that changed colors as the twin suns moved across the sky. Lisa Rodriguez sat beside him, checking her data pad one more time. She was Earth's best diplomat, and she had spent months preparing for this moment. Every word had to be perfect, every gesture had to show respect. This was humanity's first chance to join the Galactic Cooperative, and they could not mess it up. "Jake, are you ready for this?" Lisa asked without looking up from her notes. She knew the answer, but asking helped calm her nerves. They had traveled for 6 months to reach this place. The fastest human ships were still slow compared to alien technology, but they had made it. Jake straightened his blue uniform and checked his medals one more time. He was a good soldier and he had fought in many battles, but this felt different. Today he would not be fighting with weapons. Today he would be fighting with words and hoping that would be enough. The transport ship landed on a platform made of the same crystal as the towers. Alien beings moved around the landing area, but they paid no attention to the human ship. Jake and Lisa walked down the ramp and felt the strange gravity of the planet. It was lighter than Earth, but the air felt thick and heavy. A tall, thin creature with 4 arms met them at the bottom of the ramp. Its skin was silver, and its eyes were large and black. It spoke without moving its mouth, and the words appeared in their heads like thoughts. Welcome, humans. I am Guide Nexus. Follow me to the assembly hall. Do not touch anything. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make sudden movements. Jake and Lisa followed the creature through halls made of crystal that showed their reflections in strange ways. Sometimes Jake saw himself as taller. Sometimes Lisa appeared to have 3 heads. The crystal seemed to be alive and watching them. They walked for what felt like hours through the massive building. Other aliens moved through the halls, but none looked at the humans. Jake saw creatures made of light that floated above the ground. He saw beings with tentacles instead of arms. He saw robots that might have been alive or might have been machines. It was impossible to tell. The assembly hall was huge beyond anything Jake had ever imagined. The ceiling disappeared into darkness, far above their heads. Rows and rows of seats curved around a central platform, and every seat held a different kind of alien being. The air hummed with the sound of many different languages being translated into thoughts. Guide Nexus led them to the center platform, and then disappeared without another word. Jake and Lisa stood alone in front of thousands of alien representatives. The noise in the hall slowly faded until there was complete silence. A voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. The assembly recognizes the delegation from the planet called Earth in the Sol system. State your request. Lisa stepped forward and activated her translator device. When she spoke, her words would be sent to every being in the hall in their own language. She had practiced this speech 1,000 times, but her voice still shook when she began. Honored representatives of the Galactic Cooperative, we come from Earth as friends, seeking membership in your great alliance. Humanity offers our knowledge, our resources, and our commitment to peace among all species. A sound like laughter filled the hall, but it was not friendly laughter. It was the sound of beings who found something very funny and not in a good way. Jake felt his face turn red, but he kept his expression calm. A creature made of pure energy floated down from the highest seats. Its voice was like the sound of wind through metal. Tell us, little Earth beings, what could you possibly offer to civilizations that have existed for millions of years? What technology do you possess that we do not already have in better forms? Lisa looked at her notes, but she knew them by heart. We have developed faster than light travel using fusion technology. We have created artificial intelligence systems. We have learned to manipulate genetic codes and cure diseases that once killed millions of our people. More laughter filled the hall. This time it was louder and more mocking. A creature that looked like a giant insect clicked its mandibles together in what might have been amusement. Fusion technology, the insect being said in a voice like grinding stones. We moved beyond such primitive methods before your species discovered fire. Artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation. These are toys that children play with in our schools. An alien that looked almost human, except for its blue skin and silver eyes, stood up from a seat near the front. We have reviewed your species' history. You wage war against your own kind for resources we consider worthless. You poison your own planet's atmosphere. You cannot even achieve peace among yourselves. How can you contribute to galactic harmony when you have no harmony at home? Jake felt anger building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had expected this. Earth's history was not perfect, and everyone knew it. But every species had to start somewhere. Lisa tried again. We understand that humanity is young compared to your great civilizations, but we have survived many challenges. Through determination and the ability to adapt to any situation. We learn quickly, and we never give up when something needs to be done. A being that looked like it was made of living stone raised one massive arm. Child species, it said in a voice like an avalanche. Return to your small world and play with your primitive toys. Perhaps in a few thousand years, when you have learned to stop fighting each other and destroying your planet, we might consider your request again. But today you have nothing to offer beings who have mastered the secrets of the universe. The votes came quickly. 47 civilizations. 47 votes against humanity joining the cooperative. 0 votes in favor. Jake and Lisa were escorted from the hall by the same silver creature that had brought them in. The alien beings were already moving on to other business. The humans were forgotten before they even left the platform, as their transport ship lifted off from the crystal planet. Lisa stared out the window with tears in her eyes. "We failed, Jake. We completely failed." Jake put a hand on her shoulder. "No, Lisa. We learned something important today. We learned exactly what they think of us." The ship turned away from Vextar Prime and began the long journey back to Earth. Behind them, the crystal towers continued to change colors in the light of the twin suns, beautiful and cold, and completely uninterested in the small ship carrying two humans home to tell their species that they were not wanted among the stars. The emergency meeting took place in a hollowed-out asteroid, floating in the debris field where the planet Kethmaran used to exist. 12 species had managed to escape the advancing darkness, their once mighty fleets now reduced to scattered groups of refugee ships hiding in the deepest parts of space. Admiral Jake Morrison walked through the makeshift conference chamber carved from raw rock and metal, salvaged from destroyed worlds. The beings who had once dismissed humanity with laughter now watched him with desperate hope in their alien eyes. The Zephyrian representative flickered weakly, his energy form barely maintaining cohesion. Where once he had been a bright pillar of contained lightning, now he appeared as little more than a dying spark. "Admiral Morrison," he said, his voice like wind through broken glass. 43 of our worlds have fallen to the darkness. Our most powerful weapons pass through the devourers like shadows. They feed on our energy attacks and grow stronger. Jake took his place at the center of the circular chamber. Behind him stood General Carl Davis and Dr. Linda Hayes, carrying the plans that Earth's best minds had developed during the long journey to this meeting. The irony was not lost on any of them that humanity now stood where they had once been rejected. The insect-like Krethak warrior prince clicked his mandibles in a rhythm that their translators identified as deep distress. "Human Admiral, our blade ships that have conquered 1,000 worlds cannot cut these entities. They exist between the spaces where our weapons can reach. How does your young species propose to fight what cannot be touched?" Dr. Linda Hayes stepped forward and activated a portable holographic projector, one of humanity's newest technologies. The device created a three-dimensional image of the devourers based on sensor data collected from fleeing alien ships. The creatures appeared as writhing masses of darkness shot through with veins of impossible color. "The entities exist in a quantum state between dimensions," Dr. Hayes explained in simple terms that the universal translators could handle easily. "They can interact with our reality to consume matter and energy, but they remain partially outside normal space-time to avoid being harmed." A surviving member of the elegant blue-skinned species that had once mocked humanity's warlike nature raised one trembling hand. "Dr. Hayes, if they cannot be touched by conventional weapons, how can they be destroyed?" Dr. Hayes smiled, and for the first time in months the beings in the chamber saw something other than despair. "That's where humanity's so-called primitive technology becomes useful. Our nuclear weapons create localized space-time distortions when they detonate. These distortions can force the devourers into full physical existence where they can be destroyed." The ancient stone creature called a Valdorian shifted his massive bulk, causing dust to fall from the asteroid's ceiling. "Nuclear weapons," he rumbled in his voice like grinding mountains. "We abandoned such crude devices millions of years ago when we learned to harness stellar energy directly." General Carl Davis spread out tactical displays showing Earth's modified naval vessels. Every human ship from the smallest fighter to the largest dreadnought had been retrofitted with special weapons during the months since the darkness began spreading. "Sometimes the oldest solutions work best," the general said. "Every human vessel now carries nuclear-tipped torpedoes designed to create dimensional rifts. Our fighters are equipped with fusion bombs that can seal spatial tiers and prevent the entities from retreating to their safe dimension." The Etherean delegate, her once bright form now dim with exhaustion and fear, voiced the question everyone was thinking. "But surely this is a suicide mission. Your species will be annihilated attempting to fight such powerful beings directly." Captain Susan Baker stepped into the light cast by the holographic projector. She was young even by human standards, barely 30 years old, but she commanded one of Earth's most advanced destroyers. Her voice was steady and confident when she spoke. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't understand humans very well. When something threatens what we care about, we don't run away and hide. We face it head-on and find a way to win." The chamber fell silent as the alien representatives absorbed what they were hearing. The youngest species in known galactic history, the beings they had rejected as too primitive and violent to join civilized society, were offering to fight an enemy that had destroyed countless advanced civilizations. The Zephyrian's energy form pulsed brighter for a moment. "Admiral Morrison, even if your weapons can harm these entities, you have perhaps 200 ships. The Devourers number in the thousands, possibly tens of thousands." Jake's expression remained calm and determined. "Then we'll have to make every shot count. The plan is simple. Human ships will serve as bait to draw the Devourers into direct confrontation. We'll use our nuclear weapons to force them into physical existence and create dimensional barriers to trap them. Your surviving fleets will provide support and evacuation for any human crews that survive the initial engagement." Dr. Linda Hayes brought up new displays showing the mathematical calculations behind humanity's strategy. "The key is creating a cascade effect. Each nuclear detonation will weaken the dimensional barriers that protect the entities. If we can maintain sustained bombardment, we can force entire groups of Devourers into vulnerable states." The warrior prince of the Krethak leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic displays. "This plan requires your ships to get close enough to the entities to use short-range weapons. At such distances, survival would be nearly impossible." Captain Susan Baker met the alien's gaze without flinching. "That's what humans do. We get close enough to make sure our hits count." The discussion continued for hours as the alien representatives struggled to understand humanity's willingness to sacrifice themselves for species that had shown them nothing but contempt. Dr. Amanda Foster, who had discovered the advancing darkness months earlier, explained the technical details of how human ships could work together to create overlapping fields of dimensional disruption. Finally, the ancient Valdorian spoke in his grinding voice. "In 10 million years of existence, my species has never encountered such foolhardy courage. But perhaps foolhardy courage is exactly what this situation requires." One by one, the surviving alien civilizations agreed to support humanity's desperate plan. Ships that had fled the advancing darkness would return to fight alongside the crude metal vessels of Earth. Energy beings who had evolved beyond physical existence would coordinate with humans who still fought with chemical explosives and metal bullets. As the meeting ended and the representatives returned to their ships, Jake Morrison stood alone in the asteroid chamber with his human officers. The weight of what they had committed to do pressed down on all of them like the gravity of a massive planet. "Admiral," Captain Baker said quietly, "do you really think we can pull this off?" Jake looked out through the chamber's viewport at the distant stars, many of them already darkened by the advancing Devourers. "I think we're about to find out what happens when you back humans into a corner with no way out." Dr. Hayes gathered up her equipment and data pads. "The combined fleet will assemble at the Rigel Nebula in 72 hours. That's where we make our stand." As the human ships prepared to leave the asteroid meeting point, messages began flowing through space toward Earth. Families said goodbye to loved ones serving in the fleet. Children recorded videos for parents they might never see again. President Helen Garcia addressed the nation and the world, explaining why humanity had chosen to fight an unwinnable war for species that had never shown them kindness. But mixed in with the farewell messages were other communications. Kaninaku. Specifications flowed between human ships as engineers shared ideas for improving their weapons. Battle plans were refined as tactical experts found ways to maximize their chances of success. Supply ships loaded with nuclear warheads launched from Earth's orbital factories. Humanity prepared for war the way they had always prepared for war, with grim determination and the absolute refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy had laughed at their primitive technology and crude methods. Soon, the galaxy would learn why that had been a mistake. The Rigel Nebula burned with colors that had no names as humanity's first fleet took position for the battle that would determine the fate of all galactic civilization. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the ESS Defiance, Earth's newest dreadnought, and watched the sensor displays show the approaching darkness. The Devourers came like a tide of absolute emptiness, their forms barely visible even on the most sensitive instruments. They moved through space without ships or technology, beings of pure entropy that existed in the spaces between reality. Behind them stretched a wake of nothingness where star systems had simply ceased to exist. All ships, this is Morrison. Jake spoke into his communication system, his voice reaching every human vessel in the fleet. Today we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for every world that still has children who want to grow up under their own sun. Lieutenant Commander Frank Turner sat in the cockpit of his fighter, leading Phoenix Squadron in the first wave of the assault. His hands were steady on the controls, despite knowing that his chances of survival could be measured in minutes once the battle began. Around him, 48 other fighters prepared for a mission that military historians would later call either the greatest victory or the most heroic failure in human history. Phoenix Squadron, this is Turner. Remember your training. Get in close, arm your fusion charges, and make every shot count. We're going down their throats and lighting them up from the inside. The first Devourer emerged fully from the dimensional void, a writhing mass of darkness larger than most human cities. It pulsed with an internal light that hurt to look at. Directly, and space itself seemed to bend around its presence. Tentacles of pure entropy reached out from its core, each one capable of erasing entire ships from existence. Dr. Amanda Foster monitored the battle from the science vessel ESS Discovery, her instruments tracking the dimensional fluctuations as the entities materialized. Captain Peters, the quantum fields are holding steady. The nuclear bombardment is forcing them into physical existence just like we calculated. Captain Roy Peters gripped the armrests of his command chair as his ship shook under the gravitational stress of the Devourer's presence. All weapons target, the largest entity. Fire nuclear torpedoes on my mark. Mark. The torpedo spread from the Discovery and 15 other human vessels struck the Devourer simultaneously. The nuclear detonations created brilliant flashes of light that tore holes in the fabric of space-time itself. Where the creature had been a shifting shadow, it now appeared solid and vulnerable. But the cost of forcing it into physical form was immediate and terrible. The entity lashed out with tendrils of condensed darkness, and 3 human destroyers simply vanished, not destroyed but erased as if they had never been built. This is Baker on the Relentless. Captain Susan Baker's voice came through the communication system as her ship dove directly at a smaller Devourer. I'm going to ram this thing with a full fusion warhead. Tell my family I love them. The ESS Relentless struck the entity at full speed with her fusion reactor set to overload. The explosion created a cascade reaction that forced 5 more Devourers into physical form. But Captain Baker and her crew of 200 paid the ultimate price for that tactical advantage. Jake Morrison watched good friends and brave officers die around him and felt the familiar cold rage that had carried him through. A dozen smaller conflicts. All ships continue the bombardment. Make their sacrifice mean something. Lieutenant Commander Turner led his fighter squadron through a maze of tentacles and dark energy, his pilots dodging attacks that could erase them from existence. Phoenix 2, break left. Phoenix 7, you've got one coming up behind you. The fighters released their fusion bombs in carefully coordinated patterns, each detonation creating a dimensional rift that trapped the Devourers in normal space where human weapons could finally harm them. But for every entity they forced into vulnerability, 2 more emerged from the void to take its place. Dr. Linda Hayes worked frantically at her console aboard the command ship, calculating the energy requirements for their dimensional barriers. Admiral, we're using up our nuclear warheads faster than projected. At this rate, we'll be out of dimensional disruption weapons in 20 minutes. The battle raged across light years of space as more Devourers poured out of the darkness between dimensions. Human ships fought with desperate courage, using tactics that no other species would have attempted. They rammed entities with overloaded reactors. They detonated nuclear weapons at point-blank range. They flew directly into the tentacles of creatures that could unmake matter with a touch. The surviving alien fleets watched in stunned amazement as these primitive humans accomplished what their advanced civilizations could not. They made the untouchable bleed. By the eternal light, whispered the Zephyrian commander, his energy form flickering with something that might have been hope. They're actually hurting the entities. A massive devourer, larger than any they had seen before, materialized at the heart of the battle. This one was different from the others, older and more cunning. It had learned to partially resist the effects of nuclear bombardment, maintaining its dimensional protection even under sustained fire. Jake Morrison saw the readings on his sensors and knew that conventional attacks would not be enough. All ships, concentrate fire on the large entity. Everything we have. The combined firepower of the remaining human fleet hammered the massive devourer, but their weapons barely scratched its defenses. The entity began to extend tendrils toward Earth's outer colonies, threatening to consume millions of innocent people. That was when Captain Peters made the decision that would be remembered in history books for as long as humanity existed. This is Discovery to all ships. I'm going to overload our main reactor and ram that thing head-on. Maybe a full antimatter explosion will be enough to crack its dimensional shields. Belay that order, Captain, Jake Morrison commanded. I won't let you sacrifice your ship. With respect, Admiral, Peters replied. This is my call to make. The ESS Discovery, loaded with antimatter fuel and scientific equipment, accelerated to ramming speed directly at the heart of the massive entity. Dr. Amanda Foster worked beside Captain Peters to the very end, fine-tuning the reactor overload to maximize the dimensional disruption. The explosion, when Discovery struck the Devourer, lit up the nebula like a new star being born. The antimatter detonation created such massive space-time distortions that not only did the large entity become fully physical, but dozens of smaller Devourers were dragged into normal reality as well. Now, Jake Morrison shouted, hit them with everything. The remaining human ships and their alien allies poured weapons fire into the newly vulnerable entities. Nuclear torpedoes, energy beams, kinetic projectiles, and every other weapon in their arsenal struck home against creatures that had been untouchable moments before. For the first time in 50,000 years, Devourers began to die. The battle continued for 6 more hours as human tactics and alien technology combined to destroy entity after entity. The sky burned with dimensional fire as rifts in spacetime created aurora effects visible across multiple star systems. When the last Devourer fell and its death scream echoed across dimensional barriers, the combined fleet found itself floating in space filled with the debris of both sides. 70% of the human vessels had been lost along with most of their crews, but the entities that had destroyed countless civilizations lay dead among the wreckage. Jake Morrison stood alone, on his damaged bridge, looking out at the stars that were still shining because brave people had been willing to die for them. His uniform was torn and his face was covered with smoke stains, but he was alive and so was civilization itself. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. The immediate threat is over, but our job isn't finished yet. We need to make sure these things can never come back. The galaxy would remember this day as the moment when the youngest species among the stars proved that sometimes primitive courage was worth more than all the advanced technology in the universe. The rebuilt United Nations building in New York City had never hosted a meeting quite like this one. President Helen Garcia stood at the podium where human leaders had once addressed only their own species. But today the Great Assembly Hall was filled with representatives from every surviving civilization in the galaxy. The chamber had been expanded to accommodate beings of all shapes and sizes. Environmental suits allowed methane-breathing creatures to sit beside energy beings who existed in magnetic containment fields. Gravity plates adjusted to the needs of species from worlds both heavier and lighter than Earth. Translation devices hummed softly as dozens of languages were converted into thoughts that all could understand. 6 months had passed since the battle of the Rigel Nebula, and the galaxy was still learning to process what had happened. The impossible had become reality when a young species armed with primitive nuclear weapons had defeated an enemy that had destroyed countless advanced civilizations. Honored delegates, President Garcia began, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. We gather today not as separate species competing for resources or territory, but as survivors who stood together when extinction threatened us all. The Zephyrian ambassador floated in the front row, his energy form now bright and stable after months of recovery. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the condescension that had marked their first meeting with humanity. President Garcia, the Zephyrian Collective formally apologizes for our previous blindness. We judged your species by standards that meant nothing when faced with true crisis. Your people saved not just our worlds, but the very concept of organized galactic civilization. Admiral Jake Morrison sat at the high table wearing 5 stars on his collar and the title of Supreme Allied Commander. The weight of command showed in the lines around his eyes, but his bearing remained strong and confident. Beside him sat the empty chairs reserved for Captain Susan Baker, Captain Roy Peters, Dr. Amanda Foster, and the thousands of other humans who had died to ensure this day would come. Dr. Linda Hayes, now bearing the title of Galactic Science Coordinator, stood to address the assembly. Her presentation displayed holographic images of the defensive network that humanity had designed to protect all inhabited worlds from future threats. The devourer entities operate on a 50,000-year cycle, she explained. Previous galactic civilizations tried to hide from them or flee to distant star systems. Humanity chose to fight, and that choice has broken the cycle permanently. She manipulated the holographic display to show a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy with defensive installations marked in blue. We have established dimensional monitoring stations around every inhabited system. These stations use human-designed nuclear resonance technology to detect entities attempting to enter our reality from parallel dimensions. The Krethak warrior prince rose from his seat, his insectoid features arranged in what their translators identified as deep respect. Dr. Hayes, my species has fought wars across the galaxy for 10,000 years. We believed ourselves to be the greatest warriors in known space. Humanity has taught us that true warrior spirit comes not from the strength of one's weapons, but from the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect others. President Garcia activated another display showing the new governmental structure that had emerged from the ashes of the old galactic cooperative. The Terran Alliance welcomes all species as equal partners in our shared future. We have learned that survival depends not on individual advancement, but on the strength we find in unity. An Etherian delegate, her translucent form glowing with warmth that had replaced her former coldness, spoke for the first time since her world had been saved. Let the historical record show that humanity did not simply join our galactic community. They became its heart and its protectors. The ancient Valdorian Archon, one of the few survivors of a species that had existed for millions of years, spoke in his voice like grinding stone. In all the eons of my existence, I have never witnessed such courage. The youngest voices in our assembly proved to possess the greatest wisdom. General Carl Davis presented the military reorganization that had emerged from humanity's victory. Every member world now maintains defense forces equipped with human-designed nuclear weapons, not because they are the most advanced technology available, but because they work when nothing else will. The irony was not lost on anyone in the chamber. The species that had been mocked for their crude projectile weapons now provided the template for galactic defense. Ships throughout known space carried fusion bombs alongside their energy weapons. Nuclear torpedoes were manufactured in orbital factories above worlds whose inhabitants had once dismissed such technology as primitive. Captain Frank Turner, one of the few fighter pilots to survive the Battle of the Rigel Nebula, stood to address the assembly. We established the Academy of Galactic Defense on Earth not to teach other species how to be human, but to share the lessons we learned about fighting when fighting seems hopeless. Young beings from dozens of worlds now trained at the Academy, learning not just human military tactics but human philosophy of never surrendering when something important was at stake. They studied the historical battles where humans had overcome impossible odds through determination and creative thinking. As the formal sessions concluded, President Garcia signed the new galactic charter that established Earth as the capital of the reformed galactic government. The document was written in 47 languages and sealed with symbols from every surviving civilization. The ceremony was broadcast across thousands of worlds, watched by beings who had learned to see humanity not as violent primitives but as the species that had saved them all. Children on distant planets drew pictures of human ships flying alongside alien vessels. Poets composed verses about the day the sky burned with dimensional fire, and hope was reborn among the stars. In the months that followed, trade agreements were signed, and scientific knowledge was shared freely between species. The Zephyrians taught humans how to manipulate energy at the quantum level. The Krethak shared their advances in metallurgy and materials science. The Etherians opened their libraries of philosophical and artistic works. But the most important exchange was not of technology or knowledge. It was the spread of what became known as the human spirit throughout galactic civilization. The willingness to face impossible odds. The refusal to abandon others in their time of greatest need. The understanding that sometimes the most primitive solution is also the most effective. Years later, when young beings across the galaxy learned about the great darkness in their schools, they were taught not about advanced weapons or ancient wisdom, but about a species that looked into the abyss and charged forward with crude nuclear bombs and indomitable will. They learned that humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology. It had been their absolute refusal to accept defeat when something they cared about was threatened. They learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of fear. And when those young beings grew up and faced challenges of their own, they remembered the lesson of humanity. Sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem is to refuse to believe that it cannot be solved. The galaxy had laughed at humanity once, dismissing them as too young and too primitive to matter. Now every world in known space flew flags that bore both their own symbols and the blue marble of Earth, the small planet whose stubborn inhabitants had saved them all. The sky no longer burned with dimensional fire, but with the light of hope itself, hope that had emerged from the most unlikely source in the galaxy, a hope that would endure as long as there were humans in the universe to carry it forward. They had laughed at humanity until the sky turned to flame, and then they had learned why that laughter had been the greatest mistake in galactic history.